Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 844, for the 8th of December 2024. Richard Saunders coming to you from a park not too far away from the Skeptic Zone studios, where you can hear, as I can hear every day, the cicadas. Now they're up and down the east coast of Australia, and this year apparently there are more than normal, and they can get loud. They call it the sound of summer. It's quite something. Coming up on this week's show, Adrienne interviews fellow Calgarian and science communicator Jonathan Stea, who recently published Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. As the cicadas go off again. Following that, for crying out loud, it's Kat McLeod, and she's going to talk about the Mandela Effect, a fascinating piece of psychology. You think you remember something? Don't be so sure. Then we have the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, read once again by Adrienne Hill, and of course written by Tim Mendham. And then a special report from Susan Gerbic. Susan went off to a psychic fair and had some readings. What's her impression of those? Find out. Then to round off the show, not Trove this week, but more Maynard spooky action from Skepticon, the recent convention in Sydney. Maynard interviews me, Alanta Colley, who is our fabulous MC, Nate Eggins, the one and only Ben Radford, and Paul Gallagher. Now, believe it or not, these cicadas are not as loud as they're going to get later in the day. It's quite something. Stay tuned at the end of the episode for more announcements from me. But now it's time for me to run up the hill in this park to the cafe and grab myself a coffee. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. You can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skeptic Studios in Calgary, Canada, and today I have a fellow Calgarian with me. It is Jonathan Stea, and he is joining me online today. And he just came out recently with a book called Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, for having me. It's my absolute pleasure.
And can you tell us a little bit about your background before we get into details about the book?
Absolutely. I'm a registered and practicing clinical psychologist. So my day job involves, for over a decade, I've been treating patients working in what's called a concurrent disorders outpatient clinic. So what that means is people who come to our clinic experience severe addiction concurrent with mental disorders. And I work on a very fantastic interdisciplinary team with other psychologists and social workers and nurses and addiction medicine physicians and psychiatrists. And so we do individual therapy and group therapy and case management and pharmacological treatments. You know, that's my day job, which I've been doing for 10 years and supervising students and residents. I also have a adjunct assistant professor appointment at the University of Calgary, where essentially I just sit on various dissertation and master's thesis committees for students, which is also very exciting because I get to watch, the future of science and watch these amazing students just kind of defend their work. My third hat, I would say, is science communication, as I've been doing that for about 5 years, just trying to help debunk and correct misinformation and pseudoscience related to mental health and kind of health more generally through social media and through writing articles and blogs and doing interviews like this, and of course, writing a book.
And the book is fantastic. I really enjoyed it, particularly, and I'm going to jump right to the very end. I think one of my favorite things is the end because it gives you something you can put up on your fridge to sort of help you with your daily, I guess, education about mental health. Can you describe that a little bit? I know I'm jumping ahead.
No, that's so important because it was hard for me to incorporate that section in the book. And so basically it's called Mind the Takeaways in the book. And basically it's just a bunch of lists and it's tables and it's just summarizing a lot of the content, but in a way that's more accessible for people. I basically wanted to teach the language of pseudoscience, teach the language of wellness misinformation and alternative medicine ideology so that people can better protect themselves from it. So there's a giant list at the back of the book that gives people things like 9 warning signs or 9 red flags of pseudoscience and various alternative medicine tropes and propaganda tactics. And I think if people can memorize these sorts of things, they will be better positioned to protect themselves from all of the crap that is out there, so to speak, when it comes to our health.
And you compare it to the actual language that would be used by a professional, which I think is really important. The other thing that you talk about at the end of the book is how to choose a mental health professional that actually will be able to help you. And I think that was such an important point because there's lots of qualified mental health professionals out there, but they may not necessarily be able to help you with your situation. And you give some very specific questions you can ask everybody that you encounter along the way to make sure that they're the right person to help you.
Exactly, yes. In chapter 9, I go through that in detail, trying to help people just navigate evidence-based healthcare and how to find good mental health and trying to describe what good mental health means and then trying to find qualified professionals to help with that stuff. And I just give some tips along the way so that people can actually interview a psychologist or a social worker or whoever it is that they're seeing to see if they actually know what they're doing, to be frank. There's lots of different harms of pseudoscience, and I think it applies to whether people are qualified or unqualified. And so we really want to, I want to raise people's spidey senses or have people be very skeptical because pseudoscience can be harmful in at least 3 ways. Like one is it can cause direct harm as an actual result of the treatments that are used. There's an entire scientific literature on harmful psychotherapies and harmful treatments in general. And in rare cases, it can cause death, but in more common cases, it can actually deteriorate someone's mental health. So there's that, but then it can also cause indirect harm because when people are seeking services from, say, an unqualified professional, their wallets are dwindling and their mental health could be getting worse. And so they're wasting a lot of time and resources, and it can be very emotionally taxing. And that can be very harmful as well because their PTSD or the OCD or depression or anxiety or whatever it might be isn't being treated properly. So there's that indirect harm. And then I think there's a third level of harm, which we may or may not get into, but I think pseudoscience is harmful at a social level because I think when pseudoscience becomes baked into our culture, it can undermine public health.
And going back to even the social media thing, you talked about ADHD on TikTok. I was astounded about what you found regarding that and the information about ADHD, which I thought most people knew about.
Yeah, it is a fascinating. So there was a study. It was a study that looked at TikTok, and this study looked at the most popular videos that talk about ADHD, giving advice or information. And the video or the study found that over half of those videos were misleading and they were viewed millions of times. Similarly, I've recently, we submitted for publication. I was brought onto a research team by Marco Zenon and his colleagues, and we did a similar study where we looked at the top videos that had the hashtag mental health on TikTok in a specific time frame in 2021. And we analyzed these videos for their content and their information and their advice, and we found that over a third were misleading. But what really blows my mind about that is that a third of those videos that were misleading, they were viewed over 1 billion times. Like we can't even conceptualize the number of billion. That's how far-reaching and pervasive this kind of mental health misinformation can be. And that's very dangerous because there's something called the illusory truth effect, which is the more times that we hear and see misinformation, our brains tend to believe it because our brains aren't good at differentiating accuracy from what's familiar.
It's actually frightening to know that misinformation like that about mental health is being watched billions and billions of times. And stuff like what we're doing, we just can't get that kind of foothold. Do you know why that would be?
In terms of what?
Like in terms of views, of people watching us. Like we're trying so hard to get out there. And I mean, I have friends who make great videos and they get 600 views.
Oh, yes.
Versus billions of views.
Yes.
I mean, I can think of like Jonathan Jerry as one, right? He just produced a video and they're hoping that it will get more views. But it's frustrating. How do we get that going? He's had one viral video, but how do we keep it going?
It's frustrating, and it's frustrating for many different reasons. So it essentially comes down to, why do people fall for misinformation? And that can happen at the individual level. There's certain factors that make people vulnerable to it. But as we're speaking about now, it can happen at the social level. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we're all targeted with misinformation, especially on social media and just in media more generally, because the algorithms, so to speak, are biased against us. What goes viral tends to be emotion-laden, sexy headlines, things that are devoid of any nuance or gray whatsoever. They're very hyped up, overgeneralized statements. And in many ways, that's the opposite of what we do in science. In science and in bona fide health professions, we're very tentative and nuanced and probabilistic and detailed with our information, and that's not what appeals to, a 10-second TikTok video.
Well, and I think they're looking for an easy fix too, and control. I think you mentioned in your book that people are always looking for control. And I think a lot of this TikTok and YouTube, they offer easy solutions, which actually leads me into, there's a lot of advertisement about natural substances that aid in not only wellness, but specifically for mental health and addiction. Can you discuss a couple of those? And just as an aside, one of the ones you mentioned in your book, Kratom, we discussed on the show last year.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. It's such a broad problem, which certainly impacts mental health and addiction in the area. But I think what's super important is getting people to get the ideology, the alternative medicine ideology. So it's watching for buzzwords, things like natural, because natural and holistic, like those are part of the narrative that tries to help sow distrust in mainstream medicine. So psychiatric medications aren't natural, or they're not quote unquote holistic, or whatever it is, but we have the natural products, we have the holistic products. And so that's part of the advertising that they'll do. And of course, there's a logical fallacy baked into that narrative. It's the appeal to nature fallacy. Just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's good or effective or safe. And so I think that's, again, kind of back to that narrative is in that language of pseudoscientific grift. I want people to recognize that kind of information, because as you mentioned, I talked about someone in the book who fell victim to Kratom being advertised as a natural, a natural substance, and therefore it's better than everything else, other synthetic, say, opioids like fentanyl. And at the end of the day, my poor patient ended up overdosing. She had a good outcome ultimately, but
that's good. But so sad that they fall for this, right? It's
and they're targeted by it. That's the problem. The wellness industry targets people. It's part of the advertising. It's part of the language. Our treatments are better. They're natural. They're safer. They've been used for thousands of years. That's an appeal to tradition fallacy, whatever it might be.
There were some things in your book I was surprised that are still around, like past life regression. I can't believe that's still a thing. And of course, you mentioned that Oprah and Dr. Oz were a big part of bringing that, I guess, to popularity.
They were. And Brian Weiss, who wrote a best-selling book about that very topic, and he's still doing workshops around the world where people are buying into this, and people are doing past life regressions all the time around the world. And even sadly, psychologists, which I think brings shame to our profession when even bona fide health professionals engage in that. For viewers or listeners, what past life regression is it's a unequivocal, clear pseudoscientific treatment. It basically means addressing someone's trauma that they're currently experiencing by addressing the trauma that they went through in a past life. So this could be 200 years ago when they lived in a past life, or 2,000 years ago, and using hypnosis to regress. That's the regression part of past life regression therapy, to regress them to a state to somehow work out that trauma. And then that's supposed to help them in the current life. It's based on the reincarnation hypothesis. And it's absolutely a scam.
And it's so popular. I just have to shake my head. You also talk about the importance of the difference between evidence-based versus science-based treatments, because the wellness industry has really kind of co-opted the evidence-based part of it. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a super important point. The skeptic community has been screaming from the mountaintops about the importance of this idea called scientific plausibility, which is basically our overall body of evidence or overall knowledge on a claim. Say, for example, the skeptic community, guys like David Gorski, Stephen Novella have headed up science-based medicine, and they use the term science-based medicine to draw attention to this idea of scientific plausibility. And what that means is it's one of the pseudoscientific warning signs, one of the 9 red flags to watch out for, because when claims are completely divorced from the broader scientific literature, that's a warning sign. So for example, no matter how many randomized controlled trials or studies find a treatment effect for something like energy healing or homeopathy, those treatments cannot possibly work beyond the placebo effect, because if they did, they would violate fundamental laws of physics and biology and pharmacology. And the reason for that is we don't have human energy fields that can be manipulated and balanced with our hands without touch. That's a principle in energy healing. A principle in homeopathy is that the active ingredient in the remedy becomes more effective when it literally becomes diluted out of existence, and that the water somehow remembers the molecules. So these are things that just completely contradict the overall body of knowledge that we currently have. The problem is that when we study treatments like this in randomized controlled trials, if you get a treatment effect, grifters, wellness influencers, whoever it might be, can then draw from those studies and say, look, my treatment works, but really it doesn't work. It really highlights the challenges of doing clinical research more than the purported mechanisms of why those treatments work.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're able to advertise, oh, look at all these studies that we have. It shows, it proves that my remedy works.
Exactly.
I loved your book. I really, really enjoyed it. Mind you, it is close to my own heart. As listeners will know that I have kids with Tourette syndrome and a whole bunch of other letters. And this type of therapy, the actual science-based therapy, was critical to their success. So I really encourage, even if you don't have family members that, or yourself, that are looking for mental health, this is a great book.
That really warms my heart, Adrienne. Thanks so much for saying that. I'm glad that you found it helpful, and I appreciate your endorsement. And yeah, it's very touching. And that is one of the reasons I wrote my book. It's to reach people in a way that I can't do as a clinician. I really wanted to, reach a wide kind of general audience, just to help people protect themselves from, again, all of the pseudoscientific noise or misinformation that's out there. Yeah, I think that it's important for anyone that's been touched by mental illness in some way or mental health concerns. And that's probably everyone, because it's so prevalent.
With that, can you let our listeners know how they can find your work? How can they find your book?
Well, I'm all over social media, for better or worse, on X and Instagram, Facebook, and Threads, and Blue Sky, and all those fun places, which are not so fun. But then I think probably the easiest way is to go to my website, which is really just my first and last name. So it's JonathanStea. So that's JonathanStea.com.
Thank you so much for joining me again, Jonathan. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
Hey everyone, it's Brian Dunning from Skeptoid here. I want to extend a special invitation to all of you. In mid-2025, Skeptoid will be celebrating our 1000th podcast episode. So we're throwing a big party by taking 60 of you to the Bermuda Triangle. It's July 7th through the 11th, departing and returning at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're having our own Skeptic Conference in our private conference facility aboard ship, plus more Skeptoidy events ashore at stops on Bimini and Key West. Come and celebrate 1,000 episodes of Skeptoid with me and a boatload of special guests in the Bermuda Triangle. You can learn all about it and punch your ticket now at skeptoid.com/events. That's skeptoid.com/events. Reserve your spot now and hope you make it back.
For crying out loud, it's Kat McLeod.
Greetings, I'm Kat McLeod, coming to you from Kitty Corner Studios, located at latitude 53.5-ish in chilly Edmonton, Canada. Do you remember Darth Vader's famous line in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back? Luke, I am your father. If so, you're wrong, and you're not alone. His actual words are, No, I am your father. Apologies to the late, great James Earl Jones for that awful impression. Right now, you may be dismissing that claim, assuming I must be someone who clearly has never watched the movie, and I must be wrong. But nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I'd wager that you think that C-3PO is entirely gold, forgetting that the lower half of his right leg was actually silver. What you're experiencing is a phenomenon known as the Mandela Effect, which makes us question even the most mundane memories from the past. The New York Times famed crossword puzzle made it the theme and defined it as, quote, a recent refinement of false memory that typically refers to pop culture or current event references, end quote. An early example is the one that's responsible for the name of this phenomenon. Many people distinctly remember the anti-apartheid activist Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. They remember the news clips of his funeral, the mourning in South Africa, some rioting, and the heartfelt speech given by his widow. However, he didn't die until 2013. He was imprisoned from 1962 to 1990 and became South Africa's first president in 1994, serving until 1999, which is what I remember him for. So it's difficult for me to believe that people thought he died in the 1980s. That is the Mandela Effect in action. It's a collective false remembering of something that doesn't match with historical records. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? Is not what the Wicked Queen says in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. She actually queried, magic mirror on the wall. But we were all kids, so maybe we just weren't paying attention. If you have seen the 1991 movie, The Silence of the Lambs, you may recall the eerie first meeting in prison between Hannibal Lecter, played by Sir Anthony Hopkins, and Jodie Foster's character, when he creepily says, "Hello, Clarice," and chills went up your spine. So, would you be shocked to learn that what he really said was good morning? He says, "Hello, Clarice," 10 years later in the 2001 sequel, Hannibal, but not in the 1991 original movie. When aviator Charles Lindbergh's infant son was kidnapped on March 1st, 1932, the entire world focused their attention on the story. Even decades later, people have heard about the 20-month-old being kidnapped from his crib. Many remember the case going cold and never being solved. But the remains of the child were found on May 12, 1932. The murderer was arrested on September 24, 1934, was tried and sentenced to death on February 13, 1935, for the heinous crime. Yet so many of us believe it was unsolved. Dr. Wilma Bainbridge from the University of Chicago is a leading expert on the Mandela Effect. Explaining the common phenomena, she says, quote, "We like to think that we understand our minds very well, or that we have good control over our memories. This is one of those cases where our memory is betraying us, and it's sort of a creepy, eerie feeling," end quote. Some people are so surprised by their bad memories that they start conspiracy theories, like an alternative timeline to explain it. For instance, paranormal researcher Fiona Broom has said that she loves the Mandela Effect because people claiming they distinctly recall different events or details could be proof that we are existing in alternate realities. Does the Monopoly man have a monocle? If you responded yes, you might just have a preconceived idea about what rich older men look like. When people misremember, there being a monocle, it's likely because they're falling back on preconceived expectations. Bainbridge theorizes one possible reason for the shared false memories is that people may recall what they expect to see rather than what they actually saw. Another possibility is that, quote, the power of suggestion could cause people to have these false memories. According to Bainbridge, her final theory is that some images are less memorable than others, and her research has shown that some images were more likely to be remembered correctly, while others were more forgettable and therefore more likely to be misremembered. Another example of a collective false memory is the iconic image of a young protester standing firm as tanks approached him in Tiananmen Square in China during the summer of 1989. Many people believe he was run over by the tank and killed, when in fact, he was pulled out of the way before he could be harmed. Boston neuroscientist Steve Ramirez has extensively studied how memories, both real and false, are formed in our brain. He explains that along with our memory of an event, we store information about how the event made us feel, even the sights, sounds, and smells associated with that memory. Pulling all those relevant bits of information together is an area of our brain called the hippocampus, not to be confused with the Canadian house hippo. I'll let Adrienne explain that reference to you, dear listeners, another time. The hippocampus doesn't just help us recall the past, Ramirez explains. It, quote, is also the same machinery that enables us to reconstruct the past. And it also happens to be largely the same machinery that helps us imagine ourselves in the future, end quote. Our memory functions aren't perfect. Ramirez reminds us, quote, when you recall a memory, for example, it's not a tape recording, or it's not an iPhone video of the past. It's actually a reconstructive process in that the memories that are the most real are probably the ones that we don't recall, end quote. He explains that because the second we recall a memory, our brain immediately begins the process of modifying it with bits and pieces of new information. Our resulting recollection is, by nature, impure. Ramirez states, quote, every memory is a kind of almost mild false memory, end quote, which I suppose is why eyewitness accounts are not that reliable. In his research, Ramirez has examined just how memories can be manipulated with new information. In one study, his team was even able to create false memories in mice. Ramirez isn't sure what exactly is behind some people's false memories, like Mandela's 1980s demise. He suggests, quote, I don't know what our bandwidth for memory is, but for some reason, our brain fills in these gaps in these stories. Maybe it's an attention span thing, where when we're learning about Mandela, we remember, oh, wow, he was in jail for that long? And then the rest of it, you just kind of skim over the Wikipedia page and it doesn't stick, end quote. In other examples of the Mandela effect, however, Ramirez sees confirmation bias at play. Quote, sometimes when you have multiple people with imperfect memories confirm each other's bias about that particular memory, it's more likely to kind of snowball. And then you get a little pocket of people that believe A happened when in fact B happened, end quote. This type of confirmation bias can be exacerbated by technology and the media, which gives us easy access to other people's opinions and versions of our history that confirm our own. And then in some instances, like a meme, it reaches escape velocity and takes on a life of its own. For example, I'm sure you've heard, life is like a box of chocolates. However, Forrest Gump actually says that his mama said life was like a box of chocolates. Many people, both in and outside of the United States, remember being taught in school that there were 51 or 52 states, when in fact, there are only 50. Some people also swear the capital of Australia is Melbourne, not Canberra. I'm not sure if that's the Mandela effect or just people outside of Australia making incorrect assumptions. The same way many people believe Toronto is the capital of Canada, when it's actually Ottawa. Run, you fools, was never actually said by Gandalf before his treacherous fall in The Lord of the Rings. If you watch it again, you can clearly hear him say, Fly, you fools. And Beam Me Up, Scotty was never uttered by William Shatner in his portrayal of Captain Kirk in Star Trek. The closest he got was, Scotty, beam us up, in Star Trek, The Voyage Home, which premiered in 1986, 20 years after Star Trek premiered on TV. The instant that still freaks my brain out, because I can clearly hear it in my head, is that Lawrence Fishburne's character Morpheus never says, "What if I told you?" in any of the Matrix movies, despite the very popular meme. Mind blown. That red pill sure is hard to swallow, isn't it? So, sorry if I've left you feeling discombobulated, but I'm pretty certain we're not living in a simulation or an alternate timeline. It's simply a fact that some of our memories may be completely false, or partly false, because our brains are fallible, but they're also intriguing and fascinating, aren't they? From Kitty Corner Studios, this is Kat McLeod, signing off till next time.
Now here's a note from our friend Rob Palmer. The Skepticamp New York City 2024 was just held, and if you go to skepticampnyc.org, you can find out what that was all about. But Rob tells me that they will have the presentations available online.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skepticon Studios in Calgary, Canada, and I'm here to read you the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 211. Don't forget, you can sign up to this newsletter at skeptics.com.au and get the full report, complete with all the links every other week, right into your inbox. But let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this time. Hi all, says Tim. Skepticon XL is now finished. No details yet on next year's event. But keep your eyes peeled on this newsletter for information as soon as it comes to hand. In the meantime, with the media silly season coming up, you can expect more UFO, cryptid, and ghost stories to fill the pages, while the politicians are, quote, having a well-earned break, end quote. And a few ghost stories here as well. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Oh, and he has a P.S. P.S. Whatever happened to mathematicians' notoriously wacky sense of humor? I'm not sure most mathematicians have one. A mention was made in the Skeptic Zone number 843 about our preference for paranormal geometric shapes moving beyond triangles, as in Bermuda, etc. We suggested dodecahedrons, and some mathematician, probably Canadian, I wonder if that's me, those crazy Canucks, pointed out triangles are two-dimensional and dodecahedrons are three-dimensional. We say, surely in this day of UFOs traveling underwater, a 2D triangle will be even less appropriate. And he says, harumph. And I think that if we include it and make it 3D, we're more likely to catch more UFOs. So there you go. Skepticon Awards. The Bent Spoon goes to Cancer Council of Western Australia. Australian Skeptics has awarded the 2024 Bent Spoon Award to the Cancer Council, Western Australia, for its endorsement of the pseudo-medical and unscientific practices of Reiki and reflexology. The Cancer Council Western Australia offers free complementary therapies, including Reiki and reflexology, to cancer patients and their families. The choice being, quote, guided by evidence-based best practice and research, end quote. None of the other state-based councils seem to offer these therapies. Note, a detailed report on the Spoon Award is in the December 2024 issue of The Skeptic. Runners-up for this year's Bent Spoon were Ellie McPherson and her naturopath consultant, Simone Laubscher. A dishonorable mention went to TV Channel 7 for endorsing astrology, weather control, and unsubstantiated autism treatments. The more positive Thornett Award for the promotion of reason went to Dr. Nikki Milne of Bond University for her work on spinal manipulation and issues with chiropractic. The Barry Williams Award for Skeptical Journalism went to the Channel 9's Age SMH senior health reporter Henrietta Cook for an article on controversial treatments for the medical condition tongue tie in infants. Lifetime Achievement Award goes to Richard Saunders. At the same time as the Spoon and other awards were made, a Lifetime Achievement Award was given to Richard Saunders for his extensive body of work, such as the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project and the Skeptic Zone podcast, which you're listening to right now, just in case you forgot, on behalf of the skeptical movement. Congratulations, Richard. Well deserved. Birth keepers putting lives at risk. This article covers a number of cases of unqualified, untrained, sovereign birth workers who go by different names, including free birth doulas or birth keepers, and the impact they've had on women and infants. New Zealand Skeptics Awards. The New Zealand Skeptics Bent Spoon for 2024 aimed high. It went to King Charles for, quote, his dedication to promoting pseudoscientific alternative medicine, end quote. Sadly, his elevation to king has not stopped his support of homeopathy. After his coronation, it was revealed that King Charles had appointed a homeopathy prescribing doctor as the head of the royal medical household. Skeptic of the Year Award went to Anka Richter, who has shone a light on the murky world of cults. And Media Bravo's award recognized the collective efforts of the team at The Press for reporting on cults in the Canterbury region and for providing a platform for survivors to share their stories. Sydney's alleged psychic crime syndicate. A woman is the third person charged with fraud following her alleged involvement in a crime syndicate claiming to be psychics. Police allege the syndicate has defrauded at least 4 victims out of large amounts of money and property. The economic implications of RFK Jr.'s anti-vaccine. The nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for the nation's top public health post has raised concerns that his anti-vaccine stance could affect long-standing healthcare practices that have prevented deadly diseases. A scaling back of routine vaccinations could also have significant economic consequences based on recent government research. Trump picks CDC critic to lead the CDC. Florida Rep. Dave Weldon, a physician and vaccine safety skeptic, has been picked to lead the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. While in Congress, Weldon introduced legislation to move oversight of vaccine safety from the CDC to an independent agency within HHS. He has previously suggested that a mercury-based preservative once commonly used in vaccines, thimerosal, is linked to a rise in autism. Why won't that ever go away? The December 2024 issue will be in the letterbox very soon, featuring a look at the not-so-normal mind. But what is normal? Exploding heads, memory issues, therapists, psychometrics, as well as a history of the Skeptics Challenge, a history of manifesting, dangerous treatments, and much more. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both like I do, because the digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. New subscriptions start with the next issue, but you can also order a copy of the most recent one as a treat. Head to www.skeptics.com.au to subscribe. Items of interest. Full government disclosure on UFOs in 2025. A British psychic says this coming year is the big one for the truth to be out there. That and the truth about the JFK assassination as well. We're just waiting on Donald Trump's inauguration. Then all will be revealed. Congressman Tim Burchett agrees. Quote, I'm hoping President Trump fires a lot of people and puts some people in there who trust the American public with the truth, end quote. He added that his conversations with the president-elect suggested, quote, that's the signal I've been given. Full disclosure is coming, end quote. New York City psychic workers' problems. Psychics whinging about a first world problem, especially their problems, with irony. Quote, Betsy LaFay left her brick-and-mortar office in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, for a remote practice. It's all about online. We're talking about SEO, online partnerships, podcasts, and all that stuff, LaFay said, adding that about 90% of her clients find her online. Otherwise, I'd just be holed up in my apartment, working online and not meeting anyone, end quote. Or TikTok is full of scammers, so let's all get on TikTok. Misleading headline of the week. Noah's Ark has been unearthed by archaeologists. Again? But, no, they haven't. The archaeologists say there's no evidence for the Ark or the biblical flood. There's no Ark being unearthed, just evidence of people living in the area. The headline writer either hasn't read the story or, shock horror, surely not, they've gone for clickbait. Silliest story of the week. Guess what? She's back. Quote, severed head tried to get in my bed with me, end quote. Quote, veteran ghost hunter broke hard, was in bed after filming in a haunted Whitby hotel for her YouTube channel when the head with bulbous eyes tried to get under the sheets with her, end quote. First of all, veteran just 2 years ago Brocard first appeared outside of her flourishing musical career, claiming she'd married a ghost whom she later divorced. Since then, it's been a whirlwind of increasingly off-the-wall claims. And the media keep publishing it. And newsletters keep running what the media keep publishing. When will it end? I'm hoping now. Please. Well, that is all for this week's newsletter. I had many people reach out to me about the AI voice cloner I used in the last newsletter, and most couldn't notice a difference even after being told the Goopy section was AI, including my parents. That led me to wonder if the AI would giggle. Well, that didn't work, and you may have guessed that last bit about signing off was all AI, and I really did try to get it to giggle, but couldn't get it to work. And I also discovered that on the 11 Lab site that they have an AI that will answer math questions. So I asked it an apparently controversial question regarding triangles and dodecahedrons, etc. Is the Bermuda Triangle a two-dimensional or three-dimensional shape?
That's a fun question. The Bermuda Triangle is a region in the North Atlantic Ocean, and regions are considered three-dimensional. It's not a geometric shape in the traditional sense, but it's often depicted as a triangle on maps, which are two-dimensional representations. So, it depends on how you're thinking about it.
So I guess that means all of us are correct. And in the wise words of Tim Mendham, quote, bring on the Calgary cuboctahedron. End quote. And I will add the Edmonton icosahedron for good measure and for Kat. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill from Calgary, Canada.
I think we need to think. Here's Susan Gerbic.
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. This is Susan Gerbic from Psychics Explained and the GSOW Wikipedia Project. So this weekend, I decided with a friend of mine, Paula, to go to a psychic fair. Richard Saunders would call them Mind, Body, Wallet fair. And it's about an hour and a half away from me. And it was a nice drive, and we went up and had a okay time. We didn't spend too long because the room was kind of small, and the readings got a little more expensive than I wanted to pay. And they had a huge smell of weed, marijuana in the room. And I know somebody was selling CBD oil, but it was just such a very strong smell. It became just kind of overpowering. And it was so loud in there because there were so many people. But I did get 2 readings. The first reading was from a woman named Annie, and she was probably the worst reader I've ever seen in my entire life. First, she said, I'm getting a 0 or a 5 or a 50. And then she would look at me and say, what does that mean to you? And I'm like, I don't know. They're just numbers. And then she described a man in his 20s with curly hair, I think, and it was blonde hair and rosy cheeks, and he was a little chubby, and he was just around me all the time. He said that he was trying to hold my hand, and he controlled my greatest desire, and he was guiding me, and he could see through my eyes, and on and on. And then she would tell me these things and just look at me like, well, who's that? And I'm like, I don't know. Who is that? And she's like, well, I don't know. And she'd just go quiet. And I said, well, he seems like he knows me. Is this somebody from work or from school, or is it a neighbor, or who is it? And I'm like, he's died, right? And she says, yeah, I think so. Let me ask. And then she would, I guess, ask him mentally. And then she would come back and say, yeah, he doesn't understand why you don't know who he is. And I said, well, it would help me out a lot if he'd tell me what his name is. And then she said, I'm getting an L. And I'm like, okay, that's a letter of the alphabet. What about the L? And she said it could be his first name, last name. It could be a word. It could be a location. It could be almost anything. And then she just looks at me with her eyes all big, like, you make sense of it, lady. And I don't have a clue. And I mean, I legit had no idea. I wasn't pretending or anything. I just sat down and got my reading. Second reading I got was a man named Sebastian, who's been doing this for a lot of years. And he had some interesting methods where he held a heart-shaped stone that was all black, like kind of like a seer stone, I guess, or something. And he held it sort of like he was holding a magic 8-ball. That's what I thought he was doing. And then he would put it on his heart, and then he would close his eyes. And he was, it was kind of creepy. Again, I just went in, just gave him money and got a reading. I didn't tell him anything. And he didn't ask a lot of questions, but he said that I need to start over in life, start fresh. I need to move. moved to another state in the United States. And I asked him where, and he gave me like 4 or 5 names. And I said, okay. And then I said, what about, my career or my life? And he goes, nope, you got to start everything all over again. I'm like, all right. And he goes, are you in a relationship? And I'm like, no, not currently. And he said, well, you will be. You're going to have 3 more relationships before you die. And the next one's going to be John or Jonathan. You're going to meet him in several places, and he's going to be just there. And then you're going to have 2 more after that. And I said, well, what's going to happen to John? And he's like, oh, it's not going to last that long. I'm like, well, then why bother? I guess I'll avoid somebody named John or Jonathan. So Paula and I had a good laugh about that all weekend. When the waiter would come over to the table, or we'd see some man that was walking by or something, we would joke and say, is that John? Anyway, there was aura readers and lots of psychic kind of stuff. But as I said, it was really crowded. It was very loud and had that really strong smell. So I think it's still a great idea. Everybody should check out psychic fairs if they're close enough to go to. This one was free if you registered in advance. And so, of course, I'm getting a whole bunch of emails, trying to sell me stuff. But just take Richard's advice. These things change over time, and it'll be technology at one point, and then the next time it'll be more angels, and then another year it'll be something else, and you never know what it is they're going to do there. There was a lot of jewelry, which was nice, but I don't need any jewelry, but I have all my awesome origami jewelry that I have, so I really don't need a lot new, but that's kind of what was there. So highly encourage you to go if you get a chance. Just don't go to a lot of trouble to go far away, because it's not that interesting. Take care, all.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Well, it's the end of a very long weekend, which I've only just popped in on the end of. Everyone looks kind of exhausted, and there's been a lot of stuff going on over this weekend at the big Skepticon 2024. Richard Saunders is here, looking very pleased with himself.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm pleased that it was a great success.
Yeah. Now, was there any controversial moments this year? Every year there's always something happens. Eric von Daniken turns up or something like that. Anything happen like that this year?
I would have to ask Ben Radford. All the controversy just centred around him this year, I'm afraid.
And his profile photo on Facebook mainly, which he refuses to acknowledge. And I think that was the big thing for the weekend. And of course you got Lifetime Achievement Award.
I got a gong, which was very flattering and quite a surprise, yes. Yeah.
Is there a cash prize with it?
Yes, I'll talk to them later about it.
Yeah, that's great. You'll be able to buy yourself a lottery ticket. Good on you, Richard. That's pretty exciting.
There it is now. In fact, Jessica, our president, is just handing me my lovely award.
Explain what it looks like to the listener.
It's a giant black flying pig, like the James Randi logo. And it says, Richard Saunders, Australian Skeptics Lifetime Achievement Award, November 2024. Isn't that nice?
Oh, well, that looks great. Looks very nice. Where are you going to put it? Everyone always talks about where they're going to put their... that'll go next to your Logie, no doubt.
Next to the Logie, next to the Emmy, next to the Oscar. It'll go next to the award I got from the James Randi Educational Foundation, and next to my plaque, which makes me a fellow for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry.
And the skeptical cats can sort of wander around it, but they can't sit on it because it's got Sharpie bits sticking out with the wings and stuff.
But they'll rub their face up against it, I think.
Yeah, the first thing they do, they'll claim it. Well, congratulations, Richard. It's well deserved.
Thank you.
Well, it takes many people to put a conference like this together, but some of the most pivotal people are on stage giving everybody the bum's rush when they've got to get off, which isn't always easy. What was your job? That was your job this year, wasn't it?
Was my job as MC to keep the whole thing on time and under budget. But everyone was very good. We didn't have often when the microphone goes out to the crowd, you might get someone's memoir in the form of a question, but we didn't.
It's a statement rather than a question, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, but we didn't have that. Everyone everyone was very on board, very engaged, and it was just such a great range of talks as well. So we really had some really fantastic.
I caught the spiders one this afternoon, which I thought was interesting. I think we should all be kind to spiders, I think, is a message to take away from that. But what was the most animated discussion that went on over the weekend?
The spiders one was fantastic. I think what I took away from the talk on spiders and their venom was how little we know about them. And I think in science you sometimes get the impression that, it's all been done. We're just, polishing the banisters at this point. But then you find things like funnel web spiders. We don't know what their venom was meant to actually kill. So there's so much more to unpack there.
And was there one that lived to the age of 43? Was that what she said?
That's right. And I love that she talked about old world spiders as well. There's a whole genre, including tarantulas, of these spiders that have 90 million years of evolution or something crazy long like that. So they've got history as the spiders.
Now, no fights broke out over the weekend, did they?
No fights broke out. I think I didn't actually come across too many examples of people really batting up against each other.
Good, okay.
I think maybe people were being polite and generous with each other, which is always good to see, but some really great material for people to chew over at the pub, I think.
And where can we normally find you online getting about and doing things?
You can find me at alantacolley.com. I do sometimes update my website, but Instagram, not to be confused with Atlanta Colley, who is doing living her best life as a foot fetish OnlyFans.
Wow. And I guess you would find that out accidentally and unfortunately.
I do suspect that she gets a lot of my mail.
This question about funnel web spiders, I don't know what to do.
Maybe she'll go into science communication herself one day.
Now, I've spoken to George Harab after a weekend of doing this kind of stuff, and your brain's in a certain fried zone. Can you explain it for people who haven't done that sort of thing where you've had to be on your feet in a sceptical way for like almost 48 hours?
It's been pretty full on. I've also had gastro for half of it,
That's
which
always a winner.
I thought I'd share with everyone. That seems nice. But it's a bit of a marathon and a sprint. You do need to stay engaged with what's going on, and I think you've got to read the room as well. We had a very sobering talk about the increasing risk of fires as a result of climate change, and I think sometimes your role as MC is to kind of reflect what the energy is and hopefully pick people up a little bit and keep things moving along.
Well, I'll let you go home and have a good lie down and be close to your own bathroom.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
But who am I here with here? I'm with Conspiracy of One, otherwise known as
Nate Eggins, your favourite sciencey musician from Brisbane.
Yes. And I tell you, and doing that in Brisbane isn't always an easy gig, is it?
I work with what I've got, and I'm lucky enough to have a wonderful planetarium there that I can use, and I've been doing a show there for a couple of years.
Yeah, I've just been looking at you with the orchestra in the Brisbane Planetarium and trying to take that to a few other national locations. How hard is it to get people out to something like that? Because we all know people just like to be wanting to sit at home and go, I've seen all the Netflix shows. Don't you hate that on Facebook where they go, anybody recommend any Netflix shows? Yeah, read a book.
Yeah. The way that I approach it is just to try and make my shows as interesting as possible, and the kind of show that when people see it, they say, I have to be there. And so it's up to them to miss it or not.
Well, I was having a look at it, and you've got the planetarium going above you, and how many piece orchestra you got with you?
Just a 4-piece, more of an acoustic rock band.
Okay. So do you point out skeptical and scientific bits about the universe looking up, or is it mainly songs about the universe in a roundabout way?
There's a little bit of everything. I do have a song about aliens and the Fermi paradox, and I've got one deconstructing horoscopes and star signs, and one from the perspective of the shadowy them that's secretly controlling the world. Wow. And are really insecure about how anyone can figure out their master plan.
Wow. Well, we'll catch you online. And you had a great weekend here at the conference.
Definitely. Always happy to be a part of it.
Look, I'm just going to go and annoy Ben by asking about Trump again. Hey, how about Trump, Ben? Radford? Yeah, drunk. I'll talk to you later, man.
Thank you for having me.
Come in. It's time to play the magic game.
Magic game.
It's time to play the magic game here. Now, I know we've got a bit of noise in the background here, but it's time to play the game that's sweeping the nation, all of Australasia. It's Radford or what? In which I ask him 2 questions which haven't really got a right or wrong answer, and we see how he goes. Okay, first of all, I have 2 things here in the... close your eyes for the moment. Yes, there's one, and there's the other one. Okay, which of those films is the best? Look down. Is Diamonds Are Forever or On Her Majesty's Secret Service the better Bond film of the 2? Ben Radford. Radford or what?
Of these, on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh, now why are you going? Is it just because you're in Australia you feel you have to say George Lazenby was best?
Yes, that's exactly. I was aware of that, and I wanted to just. I didn't want. There's been enough ruffled feathers recently. I didn't want to create an international incident by not picking Lazenby.
Well, you have Jill St. John was Tiffany Case. You've just badmouthed her. Although you have Diana Rigg is actually in this one.
Well,
so.
you know that. I have to say, Diana Rigg was one of my early. I knew I was heterosexual when I saw Diana Rigg. I'll just leave it at that.
An episode of The Avengers.
Yes.
Wow, people worked it out for yourself. Well, there we go. Okay, that's the first question. Second question, the answer's in there. But of course, what do you think is Audrey Hepburn's most underrated movie? Audrey Hepburn, her most underrated movie. I'll give you a clue. It's not her final one. The one where she was with Sean Connery for the
right.
No, Robin and Marion. Not that one.
Underrated. I would have to say The Shining by Kubrick.
Wow, she wasn't even in that.
Well, that's how underrated she was.
That's true. That's fine. I think she was in a crowd scene. Well, the actual answer is this one here. Paris When It Sizzles, shot in 1963, not released till 1967 because the studio didn't know what to do with it. It's a meta film. It's actually of a French film. It's about how you make a movie. It starts with William Holden there trying to write a movie in his hotel suite. Audrey turns up for the final script. He hasn't got it yet, and then they write a movie which then turns out to be played out in various parts of the movie at various times.
Clever.
And in the end, they decide it's rubbish and they throw it in the bin.
Okay, well,
which if only more movies had done that. So there you go, Paris When It Scissors, people. There you go. So you won. It's a 0-0 draw.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben Radford, and please don't have me put you off coming here again.
Not at all. I've had a delightful time, and I'm looking forward to coming back, like a boomerang does.
Look, and people come from far and wide, and even from that mythical place known as Melbourne. Who have we got here?
I am Paul Gallagher, Vice President of the Australian Skeptics Victorian Branch Incorporated.
Now, you had it last year, didn't you?
We did have it last year.
So this conference has been big. You've been able to relax and watch everybody else panic.
It has been a different experience for me, yes.
Well, what was your highlight of the weekend?
I would say, the panel yesterday and probably Ian Bryce today was a great thing, but I think the dinner would be the highlight for me.
What was Ian talking about today?
Ian was talking about the $100,000 challenge and a challenge, $100,000 challenge and an attempt to get the $100,000 with a perpetual motion machine. And there was some, a little bit of hanky-panky going on.
Now, do Victorian people ring you for that as well? Do you get the people coming to you for that down there as well?
Not to the extent that you guys do up here in Sydney.
Oh, well, Sydney has a lot of cranks, I tell you.
Sydney has a lot of cranks. We've had the odd email here and there, but we don't get a lot of people coming in. I think it's $10,000 we have, so that could be the reason why.
Right. People want the big bucks.
They want the big bucks. Yeah.
They want the big bucks without substantial evidence.
That's right. Oh, yes. There's never going to be any substantial evidence, of course. And if things don't go their way, it's always our fault. We might bring the wrong vibes.
Yes.
Or there's just too much tension, or things just weren't right that particular day.
Well, it seems like there was quite a vibe going on this weekend at the conference here.
Yeah, it was a good vibe. It was a lovely vibe. I think the numbers were pretty good, like very similar to what we had last year in Melbourne. So, I was quite glad with the numbers that turned up.
Well, enjoy our drinks here because it's been a big weekend.
It has been a great weekend. I'm going to enjoy it and have a bit of a wander around, yes.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Now, a book recommendation from me, The Skeptic's Guide to Alternative Medicine by Stephen Novella, from The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. I was very lucky. I had a birthday recently, and a very magical skeptical fairy waved her wand and sent me the audiobook of The Skeptic's Guide to Alternative Medicine, and I thoroughly recommend it. I'm enjoying that very much, and thank you to that magical fairy. Now, as the show is running a little long this week, I think we'll save the dice game until next week for those fans of the dice game. Or, right now, I could look at one of the cars driving by and look at the last number of the number plate. What do you think it is? Believe it or not, it's 5. Thank you to all those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions means the show keeps going, of course. But for this week, the cicadas have all stopped for some reason. They come and go. This is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.